All right, rear choke defense. This is when your opponent attempts to rear naked choke you from behind while standing. So the first one here is when I'm not pulled back. So if I turn this way, anytime my opponent is shorter than me, I'm probably going to be pulled back. So we're just gonna pretend like I'm shorter for the sake of the move. If I can look down and see my toes, this move will work. But if I'm pulled back even this much to where I can't see my toes, I'm not going to be able to get the move to work because I need to be able to put my shoulders in front of my hips. Okay? And so even being pulled back just a little bit will prevent that. Okay? So either our opponent is shorter than us, or even if they're taller, they've just pulled us back. So a lot of times my opponent will kind of put his hip into mine and pull me back, and then I'll have to use a different move. So for this move, I have to be able to see my toes. Okay. So number one, anytime this arm comes over, I don't want him to be able to sink that wrist so deep that I can't grab it. Okay. So prevention on this is essential. So anytime this arm comes across, I want to catch the wrist and catch the elbow. And the way that I'm going to do that is by putting the middle fingers on the bend of the wrist and on the bend of the elbow. And I'm going to dig all my fingers on top. Nice big hooks here. So preventing that wrist from sinking deep and the elbow going in line with the chin. Okay, I don't want either of those. If he sinks this up, I can still probably get it, but I don't want to get here. Okay, if I can prevent it, I'm going to. By grabbing here and pinning this to my chest, it's going to make the move a lot easier. So if he sinks this in nice and deep, and I can't pin the arm to the chest, it gets a lot harder to do the move. Okay, so I'll show the move one time through with all that said, and then we'll break it down. So just nice and slow here. I'm just bending and then tucking the shoulder. So very easy, very simple move. If you can bend at the hips like this, you can do the move. So my opponent grabs, I immediately catch the elbow and wrist. Okay, don't grab anywhere else. If I grab down here, that wrist will sneak up. I've got to be on the wrist. Probably the most important part is keeping that wrist down. Pinning the elbow to the chest creates tightness and helps me lift my opponent easier. Okay, if I leave this loose when I go to lift, I'll turn this way, it creates a lot of slippage here. And you'll see that bending over doesn't do a whole lot. Okay, the arm just slips and I don't lift. So by pinning tight this arm to the chest, now I'm able to lift my opponent. Okay, I've got the arm pinned, and I also want to raise this shoulder a little bit. If I don't, sometimes he slips off and he lands on his feet. So what that looks like is I go to lift and he slips and ends up here. So by lifting the shoulder a little bit, it just ensures that that arm stays in place. Okay. I want to scoop my hips underneath my opponent's hips. Okay. If my hips are clear up here in his stomach, I don't get as good as a lift. See how his feet barely come off the mat there? So keeping this pin helps with that and really scooping under and back. Okay? We can even walk back into it to generate some extra lift if we need it. But generally, I like to just try and stay nice and stationary with my nice, just shoulder width stance. So from a few angles here, he grabs, immediately pinning nice and tight, lifting the shoulder, and I want to align the hips right in line with this quad. If my hips aren't deep enough, he tends to roll off the side. If they're too deep, okay, I tend to put myself in a headlock here. So another angle, what it looks like. If my hips are too deep and I try and lift, he falls off that way. So it's important that I line my tailbone up kind of with his quad, just the front of his quad, on the same side that I'm grabbing. Here, I'm just gonna shift. You can see how my tailbone is right in line with his quad. You can feel it. Okay, shoulder raises. I just lift here. And now, once I'm bent over, I just tuck the shoulder to complete the move. What we don't want to do is start to tuck the shoulder prematurely. What it does is it takes my spine out of alignment and actually makes me weaker, okay? I want to bend looking straight down and then at the last second tuck. So don't get too eager on your tuck. We want to bend as low as we can. So the more hamstring flexibility you have here, the better this move is going to be, okay? If you can tuck your head down to your knees, it's going to be a lot better. If you only have flexibility to come to here, that's okay. It'll still work with the shoulder tuck at the end, but the more you can bend, the better. So we're just going to have our knees slightly bent and fold in half as much as possible. So a couple times here. We don't have to go fast on this move. Once his feet are off the mat, he's mine. Okay, he has zero base here. Bend, tuck. Okay. A couple more angles here. Immediately catching. Raise the shoulder. Align the tailbone. I'm pinning this arm nice and tight. Bending. Tucking the shoulder. I'll show one time where I don't tuck the head as much, and you'll see some of the issues. If I only bend to here and then try and tuck, what's happening is his feet are still underneath his head. And so as I try and dump him by tucking the shoulder, there's a possibility that he'll swing his feet under and land on his feet. So with a low head and tuck the shoulder, okay, that's kind of exaggerated, but I'll even bend to maybe closer to 90 and tuck, and there's a good possibility he'll still land on his feet. So that's why bending in half as much as possible, what it does is puts his feet over his head more. The higher I can get his feet and the lower I can get the head, the less likely his feet will swing back under. So one more time, maybe from back angle here. You can see how low I'm getting his head and how high I'm getting his feet. Okay. So a little bit of flexibility helps a lot. It's not necessary, but it definitely helps. Okay, so really try and duck that head nice and low.